Everyone, it's Melissa Sweet here from Croaky Blog. We're at Canberra Uni and we're here to talk just justice with Collis and Wayne Applebee, who've got a lot of experience and expertise in this field, so we're looking forward to hearing from them. Paul and Wayne, can you introduce yourselves and just give the viewers a sense of where we are, please?
Yeah, I'm Wayne Applebee. I'm a Kamilaroi man. We're in the University of Canberra where I'm doing a PhD. And this is Paul.
And that's Wayne.
Paul and Wayne show. And Paul, you've just finished your PhD.
Yep. Yes. Want the extended version or just the yep?
The extended version.
Well, the extended version is that I looked at Indigenous identity, but in particular masculinity and the Aboriginal masculinity in the 21st century. Found it's very difficult to describe or define anything as particularly this is Aboriginal or that isn't. I end up looking at performances around Aboriginality, and in particular my thesis work looked at the difference between being black and being Barkindji or Kamilaroi or Ngunnawal, if there is such a difference, and there is. It's described in the novel and in theory.
Fantastic. So can we read your PhD online?
No,
is it
you
available?
can't.
Will it be available?
Well, possibly.
Good.
Not yet though.
Okay. And Wayne, what's your PhD about?
My PhD is about social media, Aboriginal use of the social media, around avatars and how people can lurk behind an avatar. It's not only that, it's just about general use by Aboriginal people of social media.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Now we're here to talk about Just Justice, which is a series profiling solutions to over-incarceration and particularly community-led solutions. So could you tell us a bit about what your experience and work in this area has involved?
Cultural stuff, and then you go to the...
Yeah.
I'll speak on cultural shortcomings and I suppose solutions, and Wayne will probably talk more specifically around institutional problems. In terms of reducing recidivism in jails, and I've had a long history working in jails, particularly boys' homes and then in Maitland and Cessnock jail as a cultural studies teacher over many years, and working most of my young professional life in Aboriginal communities. And whilst I've done a PhD at university, I would still say that I'm working for Aboriginal communities rather than working with or for a university or somebody else. So my whole work life has been dedicated towards my people, I suppose, or peoples of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, but more particularly Koori people on the East Coast. So, coming from Burke, there is lots, the issue around being black and being Barkindji or black and being Kunya or Niambar or any of those tribes from out that way, is that in town we don't practice anything culturally. In fact, the cultural stuff around traditional identities has been shamed out of us. It's shamed out of us in schools, shamed out of us on the street. A few years ago we had some serious suicides in town. I said to one of my cousins, this town needs to be smoked, as in terms of a smoke ceremony. He said, don't be talking like that, cuz. Fucking shame. And so this shaming stuff has become very much a part of us being ashamed of ourselves, of our black bodies. My PhD looked at a lot of that in performance stuff. And then later on, working in jails, the one thing that becomes apparent is that most of these guys, both boys and men, say what's missing in their lives is that they've got no way to be held by elders or to go through law or to go through culture. So I just wish some old bloke, some of the old fellas to hold us and say, come here boy when I'm stressed out, there's none of that in town. So once we start to, and I'm a great believer in art therapy as a really massive tool and a fairly cheap tool as well, something which people can involve themselves in. I've seen Aboriginal artists co-ops in both the Northern Territory and up the North Coast of New South Wales work really effectively. The idea is that the artists will come and work, 15% of they'll have an arts manager who'll help put on exhibitions, sell their gear, have an art shop or a front of house shop where they can sell their gear. 15% of the sales of their stuff goes back into the artist co-op for materials and for the wage for that person. And the rest goes in their own pocket. So people from the community come up and work every day if they like. 7 days a week if they want to, if that's the way they want to operate. in jails, both in male and female jails, and boys and adult jails, or children's and adult jails, a lot of Aboriginal people participate in art programs, but they don't participate when they get out, because there's no bloody art co-op. There's nowhere they can buy their art materials. There's nowhere to store their art materials. All of that just is kind of stuff which most people take for granted. But you've got to remember, these people are kicked out after a serious amount of times in jail. They're landed on somebody else's doorstep for a home or a bed, and it's just, you know, they talk about being afraid. The thing that happens, generally they'll go back to drugs or alcohol or to whatever was there before they went in. In jail, they're not quite often, they're not taught about or allowed to practice responsibility. That responsibility is taken away from them, and that's in the hands of the prison officers, that kind of stuff, the teachers. So they don't get a chance to practice what responsibility is. They become these individuals, and I think when they're acting like that, they're acting outside of a social framework which we would understand to be Aboriginal, and I would call that behaviour being black as opposed to being Barkindji. And there's a lot of our people are like that. As I said, it comes back to this issue. For me, it's an issue of identity and identity performance. So if we were able to put young blokes, or any people, young and old, to take them through a series of 12 months in and out of the bush, training in and around traditional law and arts practice, those kind of things, with a step to going towards maybe first stage of initiation, I reckon you'll cut those numbers of recidivism virtually off the map. Those that want to come, and most of them say they want to come, let's give them a chance. A lot of people say they want to go to rehab, but they want to go to rehab for bail options, you know, and that's why not? Why not? It's, you know, if you're in jail for drugs, that's a health issue more so than a crime issue. But when you're starting to steal and, you know, bash people for money for drugs, it becomes a legal problem. You know, it becomes a social issue. So it's complex. There's no one answer to this stuff. There's no one answer at all. But that would be the approach I'd dedicate the rest of my life to. Writing as a form of art therapy. We know it works with men and women that are coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. These arts therapy things are really helping with PTSD, but we're not applying it enough. It was tried many years ago, back in the 70s and 80s, and sometimes in the 90s. I remember some teachers going into Long Bay and others and doing art therapy, particularly writing. It seems to have fallen off the map, you know. And if you can't read all right, doesn't mean to say you haven't got a story to tell. You've got these smartphones where you can talk and tell your story. So, you know, and at that juncture of stuff for social media, my esteemed colleague.
Yeah.
Thank you. Would you like to introduce yourself again, just
Yeah,
for people
Wayne
who are only
Applebee.
joining us now? Thank you. Yeah.
Wayne Applebee.
Both Paul and I are members of the Circle Court, the Gallumbeni Circle Court. Mouthful to say it, but I've been there for probably about 8 years. Paul's been there for around about 7, isn't he? Yeah. And we've seen a lot of people come and go. They have to be assessed to go to the court. What that entails is at least 2 or 3 panel members of the court will interview that person and see if they're suitable. Invariably, those that are forwarded to the court actually go through the court. Occasionally you will have some people that will be rejected for various reasons. They may have been before the court a couple of times before and haven't complied with some of the conditions. But what I've been noticing is a lot of the sentences post-sentence is where the breakdowns occur because of drugs and alcohol. And no actual mentoring programs for these people once they leave. So we've determined that what we should have is pre-sentencing, where an individual might come before the court, is assessed that they probably would likely go to jail for their offence. So we'd like to see them enter into a program where they have some reason to complete the program, because it's all subject to their sentencing once they complete the program. But in addition to the actual program, what we'd like to see is some sort of health professionals working with them around drug issues and testing them while they enter the program and complete the program all the way through. They're drug tested. because the big problem in Aboriginal communities is drug and alcohol. It's a major issue, one that probably, if we don't start to tackle it head on as a health issue, not a criminal issue, but a health issue, then this problem's going to escalate out of all bounds. Where it is now, Aboriginal people are being incarcerated at far greater numbers than any other group of people in Australia. So the things that we're looking to do is to change the paradigm completely, where it's a post-sentencing before these people actually get sentenced, and try and work through the problems they have. And that, I think, would be one solution to a great problem that we have in our community.
And have you had much buy-in from government at all, or the relevant authorities?
Very little. We've actually discussed a program that Paul and I developed called Circuit Breaker, and it's about mentoring and providing the sort of skills, education-wise, and mentoring Aboriginal languages, the whole range of issues around Aboriginality. But at this point, we haven't had the sort of support that we need to get this program off the ground.
The stuff that governments are saying to us, like local politicians, they've got a limited budget.
Yep.
But how much is a person's life, or that kind of... So you start asking existential questions around it. But their money is directed towards big infrastructure stuff like rehabs, that kind of stuff. The stuff we're talking about right at the other end of that doesn't really... it's not important enough compared to a building. And there's not enough buildings either. So there's no men's group, for example. There's no men's place where we could take men out for respite away from Canberra. And that's pretty typical of everywhere, really. Some men's groups out at Walgett and up the North Coast, they work really well, and they're doing, when I say really well, they're working well in the circumstances under which they operate.
Excuse me.
So Meg Williams, who's watching and has just sent in some comments, she said about how important it is to be talking about drug and alcohol issues as health issues first, and also
Absolutely,
underscored your point about the importance of art and cultural solutions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The idea of telling your story about what your story is in many ways is the first step to recovery and to discovery.
Yeah. Discovery, what do you mean by that?
In class, for example, when I'm teaching here at uni, sometimes, and it's more often than not, you get somebody that is a student that is unwise or perhaps racist towards or sexist towards women or to disabled or something like that, or to Aboriginal people in particular. One of the things that comes up enough is, well, why do we have to do Aboriginal studies? We're all Australian, aren't we? Well, if we're all Australian, you wouldn't have the disparity between black fellas in jail and white fellas in jail. When Wayne says it's more difficult, but more likely Aboriginal people go to jail, you're talking somewhere between 8 and 12 times more likely to be pinched on the street.
Actually, it's 15 times.
There you go. So, these are... And the suicide rates are incredible. So instead of shutting those people down, the racist ones down, and the same would go for the discovery of yourself, instead of saying, no, this is what you need, let you talk it out, and then you could hear yourself. And you go, oh, gee, I didn't think I meant that. I didn't think I sounded like that. And particularly for young people, they, for the first time, when they're given the right to, being asked to speak, that is actually a very old Aboriginal way of doing things. A lot of the old initiated fellows would stand around the outside and the young initiates in the middle asking them to talk. And then we would help correct them when their behaviour or the language is wrong in terms of law. Now that's what we used to call shame. But shame to bring them back to the group, not shame to identify them out of their Aboriginality. It's a completely different worldview. When you start talking to blokes in jail and custody and that, and breaking it down into that, these are not simple ideas. They're performances, but when you start breaking it down and go, oh yeah, I can do that. And they want to, a lot of people I know want to participate because it is difficult, but they're ready for it. No good going to rehab unless you're ready for it. No good coming to this unless you want it as well. And I think we all need it.
So Meg sent in a question. She's asking if we know it's cheaper to do rehab than build more prisons and more prison beds, how do we keep government accountable? How do we actually push governments to do the sorts of things you're talking about?
It's got to be more than an Aboriginal issue.
Yeah.
It's got to be an Australian issue. That's how you push them.
The other thing is, governments tend to build jails and fill them. What we should be looking at unique ways to keep people out of jails and pour the money into that. Like there's programs that we could have implemented that would keep people out of jail and we're almost certain would make a difference.
What sort of programs are you talking about?
Well, programs like Circuit Breaker, where
Health education.
very health education, acting in concert with medical programs that would absolutely keep people out of jail. And like the cost benefits would be great, because to keep a person in jail here in the ACT is about $500 a day. Nothing like that we would spend in our programs. We're talking about a few $100 maximum, as against $500 a day to keep one individual in prison.
Circuit Breaker, is there somewhere we can find information about that online, or how can people access that?
Yes, I have got it online. Circuit Breaker is online.
Great, so if we Google Circuit Breaker, we'll find that. Paul,
There's a program up in Yuendamu called the Mount Theo Project. And when we started to develop Circuit Breaker as a concept, I was basing what I knew on that, and that was around identity. I'm saying if you change people's approach to themselves, give them a really strong cultural base from which to come from, and cultural laws in which to respect and participate in, there's that responsibility stuff. You won't see them anywhere else. They'll start to come back. They want to know, and this is the Mount Theo experience, they want to know about who they're related to, how they're related, what that bloodline means, what that totem means, what this bird means. How can I listen to the wind, Uncle Paul? How do you know this? And right from kids at 7, 8, 9 and 10 when we would take them on culture camps, these are lifelong lessons. I still see men now run up to me every now and again in Newcastle or other places and say, "Oh, brother, you remember me?" I said, "Oh, no," because they've grown that big, He says, "Oh, you took us on a culture camp when I was 10. Can you take this fella here?" Pointing to his son or his grandson. So there's been a breakdown. It hasn't been sustainable. We haven't been able to get money or participation with Parks and Wildlife to go back onto our country or onto private property to take men to sites and that. They were the next ones to be doing these things. It's no good just me knowing the stuff or Wayne knowing the stuff. It's got to be something which they participate in for themselves, their own growth, and then grow it. That's the way culture was always performed. Now, talking about health, I heard yesterday, I just want to raise it as a bit of a discussion. Maybe you might have something on it. I heard a guy on radio, I think Triple C or Triple X, he said that there's no word in the Aboriginal traditional languages for disability. So now we're talking about Aboriginal disability and in terms of funding and that kind of stuff, and we're trying to work this concept into how we are. So language becomes a real issue around how we understand ourselves. In fact, it's probably the biggest one. What if you can't speak very well, or if you don't know that your own traditional language? You start to think, "Oh, what have I been missing here?" So these things aren't easy. I don't know all the answer to them, but I know that somewhere, for me, it's based in that traditional culture, in that traditional understanding of ourselves. We have a lot of students here at this university that tick the box as coming in as Aboriginal or Torres Strait, but we don't see them at the Aboriginal Centre because they don't want to be identified as Aboriginal. What's going on there?
The other thing is a lot of the people that actually appear before the court, we'll ask them, how are you, say for example, Kamilaroi or Ngunnawal, or wherever they came from. Many of them have no idea how they're Aboriginal or what ethnic or tribal connections they have, and they can't explain how they are. So these are some of the problems, like
that's the discovery.
Yeah, that's part of the problem that we have. They don't know how to be Aboriginal. That's why the mentoring programs are so important. They want to know how to be Aboriginal and they try to be Aboriginal. Like, for example, online, there's a lot of people now that go online, they're learning how to be Aboriginal online on many of these Aboriginal-only sites. They're practising to be Aboriginal.
Just to let you know, someone asked about Circuit Breaker again, about whether it's online. Yes, you can find it online. So if you Google for Circuit Breaker and maybe Wayne Applebee and Paul Collis's names, you might find it. And also just to let you know, when you were talking about Mount Theo, there's a facility for people to send in hearts when you're talking. So you got lots of hearts when you're talking about Mount Theo, and also
Wonderful project,
some clapping hands came in as a little emoji. So, you know, the idea of cultural solutions, obviously that resonates a lot.
Yes.
One of the misnomers in jail is that one of the observations I found is a lot of Aboriginal prisoners in jail have a concept that being together is being Aboriginal. But in jail, you've got an unreal situation where it's through a force of violence or the threat of violence upon you, whether within the yard, like with other prisoners, you know, so you've got to stick together for that kind of stuff, being solid and all that kind of stuff, solidarity. That's true. But what about if you took the violence away and you stuck together for love? Out of that love of yourself and your people, love of your country. How do we understand those things when we don't participate? The sorts of things that Wayne and I discussed in Circuit Breaker has been absolutely essential, is people coming out of jail, and even a lot of young guys going to jail, don't know how to cook. They've never shopped for themselves because they've never owned a place or paid rent or that kind of stuff, you know, where they have to be responsible to go and do these things. How do you pay rent? How do you cook? What do I need? Those kind of things. They're basic
skills.
needs, they're life skills, yeah.
Life skills.
And if you're spending most of your life in jail, somebody else is cooking for you, where do you get a chance to learn how great it is to cook a meal for somebody?
A lot of these people live at McDonald's because they don't have the skills to do simple tasks that we take for granted. Simple things like just making a cup of coffee. A lot of them would be able to do that. But beyond that, difficulty, I believe. Yeah.
So
a lot of them that I've interviewed don't have those types of skills. They can't cook, can't look after themselves. They're more or less, they rely on jail just like their home. A lot of them don't have any real issues about going back to jail. It frightens them because they lose their freedom. But once they get in there, it's like they're catered for. You know?
So you're highlighting, because Just Justice is about trying to reframe incarceration as a public health issue rather than a law and order issue, and you're raising yet another health consequence in a way of just empowering people to actually look after themselves.
Very
it runs
simple
outside
things
the
they can't
cells.
do.
It runs outside the cells as well. When you've got fast food outlets like McDonald's and that kind of stuff, and if in the past you were semi-reliant on traditional food, so going out in the bush or even going to the river to fish or down to the ocean to fish, and you've got these things now being mass marketed to you, you stop that practice, don't you? That's what we're finding in the Territory, that's what we're finding in New South Wales as well. Now, that's a direct impact upon the health and well-being of a community and of individuals. And if kids are growing up into that and they don't know any other way, then we need to address that serious health and cultural issue as a nation.
Circuit Breaker was all about those sorts of things, about teaching people how to cater and look after themselves, be able to prepare food for themselves, be able to manage their budgets, do all those sorts of things. And all the time getting mentoring through the whole program, so that at the end of it they learn how to use computers, get life skills, all sorts of things that an everyday person needs in their life. A lot of these people miss those things because they're stolen generations, or the children of stolen generations. They don't have these skills. A lot of them have been institutionalised and only know to live within the institution, can't live outside an institution.
Yeah. I'm just conscious of time because I know you two have another appointment. Paul, could I just return to something you raised before when you said, how do we get action? And you said we need to make this not an Aboriginal issue but an issue for all Australia. So can you just elaborate a little bit what you mean by that and how you think we could achieve that?
OMG, what more can I be simple about? How do you encourage all people to understand that these are health issues, when in fact you'll have we've already got a divided country in terms of what's more important, law and order, which will get your votes and get Pauline Hanson and these kind of, you know, the more conservatives or right wingers saying, I want my country back. You could see it in America with Trump, and look, terrible what happened to those policemen being shot at work. But I've never seen that cry apart from the rage in the black community when those black people have been killed. I've never seen governments running together and church people holding hands and we'll all walk together across the bridge of, you know, to the Golden Shore. I've never seen that kind of stuff, and it feels like we're being told to go and get fucked and left out again, you know. And you get sick of trying. People do get sick of trying. It has to be somehow embraced in the big institutions, in school, in church, right across the whole spectrum. You can deal with the issue of history by teaching a different version of what John Howard didn't want, you know. He said, I don't want a black armband. I don't want a black armband view. Well, let's talk about the history. Let's talk about stolen children. Oh, we've dealt with that, they told me in my PhD. I said, not in my community. I said, oh, you can't go back to post-colonial stuff, Paul. I said, nothing post in the coloniality that I'm seeing. Just have a look at the incarceration rates, look at the suicide rates. And they're only one aspect of our community. There are people, the criminals in our communities quite often are preying upon poor Aboriginal people preying on other Aboriginal people because we don't have enough money for security. Well, why should we be putting iron bars around ourselves anyway? Those guys need to be going to men's camps, and the women that are doing that need to be going to women's camps, be taught how to behave.
There's another issue. Long ago, the Hawke government had the Royal Commission into deaths in custody. They made 339 recommendations.
Yep.
A handful of those were ever implemented. Today there's many, many more, hundreds that have died in custody.
Yep.
And the situation is vastly worse today than it was then. What was that all about? Why did we go through all these processes for no outcomes? We need to look at this a lot harder and start to implement those recommendations.
Yeah, you've got to fund it to grow it, mate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just know your time. You just made a rousing call for mainstream institutions to stand up on this issue. Croaky readers are probably health professionals, health organisations. So what would you say to those, you know, that very powerful sector, you know, the AMA, College of Nurses, the Public Health Association? How can health organisations engage? What would you like to see them do?
Well, we've got Aboriginal medical services, right?
Yep.
For one, we've got Aboriginal legal services, but they are grossly underfunded to start off with. Part of that is that they end up working in isolation from main health streams and mainstream services. So working in isolation again creates this thing that there's something wrong with us. I've seen a guy, an Aboriginal leader in Sydney a few years ago at an Aboriginal Day celebration. He stood up, he had the police commissioner, all these fellows there in Redfern. He started off okay, talking, you know, politely about our welcome, like to acknowledge Auntie so-and-so and all this kind of stuff. And then he just cut loose. He said, hang on, there's something wrong with this. He said, why have we got a fucking Aboriginal medical service here? We're supposed to be all Australian, aren't we? So it's that kind of stuff. I don't know how you fix big institutions. I think it's with conversations. And I hear a lot of people saying, oh, it's a conversation, we've got to have a conversation. Well, I don't see anyone talking to me.
The other issue that is a major one for Aboriginal people is how the Aboriginal legal service is massively underfunded, year after year after year, to a point where some of the services that were implemented years ago have been long lost. There's like for issues around domestic violence and care through those issues, it's all gone. There is now the situation where to go to the Aboriginal legal service, you virtually have to plead guilty to get any assistance. That's a joke. Isn't that a joke? For people that needs the support that they deserve as citizens of Australia, they don't get that sort of support. They have to plead guilty to get the legal service to support them. What sort of country we live in?
And a lot of legal service lawyers have had to operate with no pay for a month or 2 months at a time, you know, because they've run out of money.
All over Australia, like in Perth, the Aboriginal legal service has gone broke there.
Newcastle,
also, Alice Springs, they're all massively overworked. We're talking in some places 90 clients a day, like in Alice Springs, for one solicitor. I mean, you couldn't even know the person's name. I mean, this is ridiculous. What's going on in this country? If we want to change things, we have to take a good long look at what's actually happening here.
That's from the institutional side. From the personal side, we need to be getting those men and women and getting them to learn responsibility. And you learn responsibility going back through that cultural expectations and understanding. So men's groups ought to be funded, women's groups ought to be funded. Places like Parks and Wildlife and farmers want to jump into bed with Aboriginal land councils now. After taking our land, they want to jump into bed with us and fight mining companies over fracking. Before they used to have signs up: shoot, don't trespass. Any coons on this property will be shot out at Burke, where I come from, all that kind of stuff. Now they want to be friends with us. It's going to take a little bit of time to get that sour taste out of our mouth as well. And there are a lot of Aboriginal people like myself that are angry about it. And we haven't had a chance to say I'm angry about it. Rudd apologised to Stolen Generation, never apologised to my grandfather for losing his country, or for me not having a country to go to, living in a town where you're looked at by police all the time. Where's that apology? Where's that compensation? He never came.
I know you have to go to another meeting. Is there anything you'd like to wrap up with? I think you've given viewers a lot of, things to go away and think about.
The fourth estate has to be honest. Be honest and come and talk with Aboriginal people, and talk to not only people like me and Wayne, but those who it affects right at the bottom end as well. You might need to find the language to speak to those people. In that case, you might need to come and talk with people in between, community leaders and others, to make access, because vulnerable people can be manipulated. I don't want that. So you need to be ethical about this. And journalists need to understand this at university. I don't know how much Indigenous studies go into journalism. Generally, it's very, very middle-class people that go into journalism, and we don't see them. But when the Olympics came in 2000, the Germans came out here in droves, and they flooded Redfern. They wanted to know what our problems are, and they are still a strong supporter. Now, isn't it amazing that people overseas know more about this country, about the plight of Aborigines than our own journalists? Where's it reported? You've got Steve Price and Ray Hadley and these dickheads, Well, I call them dickheads. They're not friends of mine. Yet they're friends of Aboriginal people that play football. They want those boys there. We should... never.
And I'd also like to just give you some feedback from Meg Williams, who's been watching and typing in lots of comments, and she's given lots of warmth and appreciation and thanks for your passion and commitment, because as you know, she does a lot of work in this area.
That's nice.
Yeah. Well, if that's okay, I'll wrap up now.
Adios, world.
Thank you very much for your time.